All right, guys, we are here with episode 21 of the 4Lifters Bylifters podcast. We have registered dietitian Dalton Nice with us today. He's also an amateur bodybuilder. We're going to talk about how those two worlds collide and get into some theory and I guess some actual science too, right?
Yeah, man, for sure.
What just to start off, like, what is a registered dietitian and how is that different than like me going online and saying like, that guy looks really good, I want to hire him as a coach?
Yeah, for sure. No, good question. So a dietitian needs to have the schooling, typically a 4-year degree. Now they're making it a master's degree.
Okay.
And then after that, you got to get a dietetic internship. And then once you're done that, which is 1,200 hours of supervised practice, you got to take an exam, which is similar to like what RNs would have to do, like a national exam. So you got to take an exam. And then yeah, pretty much you're good to go after that. But yeah, a nutritionist, just like you said, you can go online and get certified with any kind of different kind of certification.
But
So,
what's like the difference though?
well, we can treat disease and we can work in healthcare. So like a registered dietitian can work in hospitals, long-term care, different kinds of community events, things like that. But yeah, nutritionists can't like treat disease. They're not, able to do those types of things.
So from like I guess like a bro perspective, like if I'm an online coach, right, and I just look really good hypothetically, and and somebody goes, well, it's between you and this guy. That guy's a registered dietitian. I feel like 9 times out of 10 they're like, well, that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, that's definitely big, in especially with social media and things. People are always geared to go towards the person that looks good or looks the best because they feel like they know what they're doing.
Right.
Generally, it's not always the case. I've even found that in my journey, that people that necessarily aren't the top bodybuilders, they know typically more than a typical bodybuilder. Like when I was coming up, I got coached by a pro bodybuilder, and later learned a lot of the stuff he was teaching me was just not correct. So,
But it worked.
Some, yeah, but there's better ways to go about certain things.
Okay. So there's also like a legal component to it too, right? Like you're legally allowed to tell people what to eat, whereas like a coach is supposed to give like loose recommendations or something.
Yeah, so we're technically licensed to be able to prescribe meal plans and write everything out. I have seen, so there are a couple of bodybuilding coaches that aren't dietitians. I've seen their plans, and they usually put at the bottom, not a registered dietitian. I'm not responsible for blah, 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 blah.
So it's kind of like SARMs, where it says like not recommended for human consumption, but it's in a capsule. Here you go.
Exactly. So yeah, we definitely have that ability, which is really nice. So,
what did you learn, like, because you were into powerlifting and bodybuilding, when you were in college, right, and maybe before. What did you learn going to school to be an RD that really like changed perspective on what you thought you had knew before?
It's a good question. I would say the biggest thing I took from that is context means everything. Because everybody really wants like a black and white nutritional answer to everything, and same thing as with exercise. And it's really not the case, because you can have two different people and give them two completely different answers of what they should be doing for nutrition and things like that. So it's really good to when you're in school to really learn all the basics, and then being able to be put in situations and learn how to apply them to different situations. So that was my favorite part about it.
So you think it gave you more of like a wellness approach to, not just having the look, but, feeling, the way that the body does look, being able to perform that way. So I think we should just like dive in. Like I have a million questions I want to ask you.
For sure.
What did you learn in school for protein intake? And then where do you stand on it now?
Okay, so good question. So it all depends what we're referring to. Are we talking about bodybuilders, athletes, or just in general?
Yeah, we're talking like
bodybuilders. Yeah. So in terms of bodybuilders, so when I was first getting into school, the big thing that people were talking about was, protein's bad for your kidneys. And as we got through sports nutrition and all those types of classes, we learned that that's really not the case. As long as your kidneys aren't compensated, higher protein really isn't going to be an issue for somebody. My stance on that now is I am a pretty high protein guy for a lot of my clients. I feel like it's a macronutrient that should be prioritized, especially when you're trying to build muscle, lose weight. It's very important.
What's the reason? Is it for satiety? Is it for the nutrients in it? Or is it just strictly because of the physique that it may build?
A couple different things. So yeah, satiety is one. Another one is it's very hard for protein to convert to fat compared to carbohydrates, for example. It's just a really long process in the body for that to happen, so it's not really likely. So if you overeat protein, you're generally not going to be gaining weight or putting on excess fat like you would via carbohydrate. So that's the one pretty cool thing about it, that it can be utilized for sure.
When you say high protein, how high?
Exactly. Yep. Context, man. Context. So, for me, so usually for people, I would say 200-pound person, maybe the most I might go is 300. Usually I might have them, depending on what their goal is, 225, 250. I kind of like it a little bit above their body weight. But because the protein recommendations that are given out that you'll read in textbooks and stuff, that's the minimum amount you want to take in without having a deficiency. So when they say like 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, that's the minimum amount you need to meet your nutritional requirements. So what I technically like to do, you can do a gram per pound of lean body mass. I'll do that with some people as well, but generally just depending on the goal, I'll usually put them a little bit higher than their body weight, 1.25, 1.5.
It actually made me smile when you said 300 because I'm a 200-pound guy, a little bit lighter right now, but for the first time 2 years ago, I tried carb cycling.
Okay.
And I got just a basic template from like Shelby Starnes, one of his ebooks, right?
Okay.
And I was like, you know what, I want to try it and see how this goes. And his protein was super high. It was just 300 grams. And so, obviously it fluctuates a little bit. I think the high carb day, I think protein came down a little bit. The medium day, it was 300 with medium amount of carbs, medium fat. And then you had your, no carb day essentially, which is high protein and moderately high amount of fat. And it was the lean bulking guide. And I actually got leaner doing it. But I actually felt really good eating that much protein. So I just feel like that's a really solid number. And even right now, I'm like 188 pounds, so I'm pretty light. But even right now, I eat 265 grams of protein, and I feel great.
Right.
It just seems to work.
Yeah, it definitely does. Usually a lot of the people I work with, when I put them on a higher protein diet, that's usually the feedback I get from them. Man, I feel great. I feel so much better. I'm feeling fuller. Energy's high. Feeling great. This is so much different. And it's pretty much straight across the board the feedback I get from people.
In order to get that high on the protein content, are you big on like rotating protein sources?
I basically go off what they're craving, to be honest with you. I have my recommendations that I'll kind of give them. Hey, I think this would be a good choice, but what are you hungry for? Like, what can you eat on a daily basis? And if you get sick of it, then we'll kind of change to something else.
So you don't think for like a micronutrient purpose that you have to like use a bunch of different meat sources and any of that?
You can, but you can also get them from other foods. So it just depends how the diet's set up. If you're not getting it from something else, you can fill it in with another food or supplementation if needed.
Do you think the FDA like clearly defines protein?
What do you mean? Like,
so my wife was vegan for a bunch of years.
Okay.
And to her, protein was like this like lentil pasta.
Okay.
To me, that's not protein. It's not complete protein. It doesn't
Right.
have the amino acids, and even if it did, it doesn't share the same bond
Right.
that a complete protein shares.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's not a complete protein, but the FDA allows it to read as protein. Do you have any issues with somebody using, nuts and, pastas and beans as protein source?
That's a good question. It all depends on the goal too. If the person is, trying to maximize muscle mass, I would say I would have an issue with that, and I would probably try to either have to pair different plant sources to make a complete protein, or find some kind of supplementation to get complete protein sources in them, or like BCAAs to add on top of that meal, something like that. But if the person's not really worried about muscle mass, don't really have that big of an issue of it, you're just going to have to eat more of it, because it's more, when you eat animal-based sources, it's more bioavailable compared to plant sources and vegan type sources like that. So you're going to need a little bit more when you go towards that.
So you
side of
think
things.
it's more important to just have the amino acids than for them to necessarily be bonded together? Like if you have, XYZ amount of amino acids in, in a complete protein, and then let's say that two sources of plant protein can make up that same amount, you think that's good enough?
Yeah, and again, it just comes back to the person. I mean, I'll always be more of a proponent of animal-based because it's complete. You have the 9 essential aminos. But yeah, it's really just depends on the person, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I wish I could give you like a
Black and white.
a black and white answer, but I can't because it really I would probably give a different answer depending on the person and what they were telling me they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, what was interesting is when I met my wife, she would eat her steak purple, right? Like
wow.
like she would tell him like just sear the outsides and give it to me, and that's how she was. And then she went vegan, watched the documentaries and did all that.
Good old Netflix.
And she went vegan for a couple years. And then I finally got her to start eating eggs.
Okay.
Right? And then she started eating eggs, started eating Greek yogurt again. Then she started eating a little bit of fish. When she did that, her stomach got better as far as digestion and stuff goes. Her skin cleared up. Her muscle tone came back. Right? So I definitely think there's something to it. Do you think there's like a genetic component too? Like, do you think if you either the way you are, like DNA structure, or the way that you've eaten for 23 years plays a part into how your body reacts to like those aggressive of changes?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I really wish they had a lot of research on that kind of stuff. I feel like they're starting to look into that a little bit more, with DNA and diets and things like that. I've been hearing a lot
the
about
blood type
that.
Diets.
Yeah, and stuff like that. So I'm really curious to see what we kind of find out in the next 10 years. But it's definitely a good question. I'm sure it probably does. I don't have an answer on that right now, but I would have to agree. I would think it would have some kind of relation. Yeah. To be honest.
I think the other issue with like plant-based proteins and concerns of bodybuilding is when you consume, like, let's say you were using like lentils as your protein source, in order for you to consume like 20 grams of protein, if you want to do that with Greek yogurt, it's pretty easy, low carb, low fat. But if you're going to do that with like lentils and beans and all this other stuff, you end up with, just to meet that protein requirement, you end up with pretty high carbs or high fat.
Yeah, man.
So then you're consuming a lot of extra calories, and that makes it a little bit more difficult, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So.
And plus with like the meats and everything, you're getting so much bioavailable micronutrients. You're getting magnesium, zinc, iron, a lot more bioavailable in those sources compared to the plant-based.
What about, so we're talking about like protein content. Obviously that can fluctuate a little bit based on enhancements.
Yeah.
So if somebody's taking the super supplements or something like that, maybe it would go up or down depending. But I also think it's good to talk a little bit about like what protein sparing is and how that can come into effect, like when you're building a diet plan.
So yeah, protein sparing is definitely very important. What kind of context do you want me to kind of roll with? Like,
I mean, I think if you could it really explain like what protein sparing is, and then maybe how you can kind of, I think if you understand the philosophy behind it, then it changes the structure of your diet a little bit, right? So if you can get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So, protein sparing would be preventing muscle breakdown in a sense. So supplying the body with enough protein. You're making sure that when you're exercising or going throughout the day, your body's not breaking down muscle tissue and using that for energy. So getting enough protein in your diet will definitely prevent that from happening, which you don't want when you're trying to build muscle,
right,
and get stronger. So having sufficient protein, you definitely want to make sure that's on point.
But you're also trying to use like your energy sources, right? So the body doesn't run well off of protein alone, right? So it wants one of the two energies, right? Carbs and fats. But the absence of the energy source would require an abnormally high amount of protein, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So
yeah, if you would have if you have a higher carbohydrate diet, you can generally, keep your protein a little bit lower because it's going to spare the proteins from being broken down more.
Right.
So yeah, if you control your carbs and you keep them high enough, you definitely can spare a lot more protein from breaking down in your body. 100%.
Does it work the same with fats, or is that kind of different?
I mean, the body prefers, glucose as its main source of energy. Good question. I don't wanna give you the wrong answer on that. So, yeah, I don't really know that one, to be honest with you.
You do
Yeah,
mainly hear of like carbohydrates as more
the main
protein
source.
sparing,
Yeah,
when it's brought up.
for sure, for
So,
sure. But I mean, I think it really comes down to like the total calories too. As long as you're in a calorie surplus, you'll be more protein sparing, in general.
when you start dipping into like higher carbohydrate diets, like uh, let's say that, how heavy are you?
240.
Okay,
240.
so if you were trying to get to 300, you would have to consume carbohydrates in your
Oh
diet,
yeah,
right?
man. Oh yeah.
Like, yeah, there's no doubt about it. Um, are you big on following the glycemic index, or did you kind of throw that out the window?
I mean, yes and no. I more so pick my carbs based on how I feel.
Okay.
By, so for example, if I have a lot of pasta, I don't really feel that great about an hour later. But if I have more of like a rice, I feel a little better. So, and they're both pretty, they're kind of up there on the glycemic index, and I just kind of have a different response towards different foods.
Okay.
So I more so go by how I feel towards a certain food more so than the glycemic index. I mean, it's definitely a good thing to look at, but when you look at the glycemic index, those are just the foods in isolation. But generally, we're not eating those foods just in isolation. They're generally with something else, so it's really not going to be on point to what the index says it's going to be.
So if you're eating white rice by itself, it might spike your blood
Mm-hmm.
glucose levels. But if you're eating white rice with a steak that has fat and protein with it,
Mm-hmm.
it may delay,
Exactly.
and then it may digest what would be a slower digesting
Exactly.
carbohydrate.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Um,
Hmm.
what about fructose
Hmm.
in a bodybuilding sense? So
Hmm.
let's forget about the micronutrients and antioxidants of fruit.
Hmm.
But where do you put like fructose, and do you utilize it at all?
Yeah, for sure. So fructose is great. If you combine fructose with regular glucose, it actually it allows your body to take in more carbohydrates more efficiently. So pre or post workout, I usually try to get fructose involved with um, my other carb sources, so
Okay.
that way I have better utilization um, with my carbohydrates, because it has something to do with I can't think of it off the top of my head. I think it's GLUT4. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, there's a different transporter that opens up when you add fructose in the mix, and it allows for better utilization of carbohydrates. It's one of the fun things I learned in sports nutrition class.
Yeah, I feel like fructose for me is probably one of the most confusing things
Hmm.
because you can read a bunch of bodybuilding articles about how they utilize it, and I think I don't want to overstep, but I feel like Rich Gaspari or maybe Labrada, like back in the day, you eat a lot of
Hmm.
fruit.
Yeah.
But then like you also read that it gets stored directly in the liver,
Hmm.
so it's not used for muscle glycogen.
Right.
So
Right.
like you only know which way to go with it. And then I was watching a Charles Poliquin video, and he was talking about how the fructose is offset by the antioxidant value. So he was a big proponent of like thin-skinned fruit because they had higher antioxidants and offset the fructose. So like I just feel like it's completely up in the air, and it's almost like whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah, and I will say too that when we look at fruit, it's not all fructose too. It's a mixture of different sugars. So there's going to be different fruits that are higher in fructose than others, but they're generally, maybe half and half of glucose and fructose. So when you're eating fruit, it's not that you're getting, straight fructose all across the board. So I feel like a lot of people will stay away from it because they think it's all fructose. That's a good thing for people to listen to. That it's not all fructose. You're getting some glucose as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What about like insulin?
Mm-hmm.
When you help somebody, whether it's like I don't know, I guess somebody that needs dietary help, or like for health purposes, or somebody that's in bodybuilding, do you pay attention to insulin? Is that something that's really necessary?
I don't necessarily pay attention to it myself. I mean, I know some people will get like their labs done to check what their, their
They're
fasting
fasting,
insulin
yeah.
and, yeah, and stuff like that. I more so pay attention to how their bodies are responding through progress pictures and feedback. So if I see somebody, continuously looking like they're putting on a little bit of fat tissue when I'm increasing their calories and their carbs, that'll kind of give me an indication like, okay, it looks like they're starting to get a little bit more insulin resistance. Let's kind of try to fix that up a little bit, maybe do a mini cut or just depending on the situation. But yeah, I've never had to do that yet. Usually I'll check, like sometimes I'll have people do finger pricks. I'll have some of my bodybuilders do that, like before and after meals, fasting, to get a kind of an idea of where they're at with metabolizing glucose and stuff. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just because insulin plays such a large role in bodybuilding, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bodybuilders use insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that you can tell that somebody's starting to become insulin resistant? Like, do they look different? Like, what's changing there?
Yeah, so I usually typically notice less definition. When we're checking in, they get more tired. They might not have as good mental focus as they generally would.
Okay.
And then once I start to see, those blood glucose numbers go up, that's usually an indicator to me that we gotta start looking at something and make some changes. Usually, I don't really use insulin with my guys. And again, I don't work with any like IFBB pros that would be more prone to using that.
Right.
It's more of the amateur, so it's not really necessarily needed. It definitely does have. It's the most like you said, it's the most anabolic hormone we have, so it's definitely very important. So.
What about what about sweeteners?
Mm-hmm.
What's your stance on sucralose, aspartame, stevia?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think they're very useful. Granted, everyone's going to be, responding differently to them. I'll know somebody that, won't do good with stevia. I don't know someone that does well with it.
What do you mean doesn't do good?
They get gassy. They might get stomach pains,
Okay.
things like that. But where the research is at right now, there's this French study out that a bunch of TikTok people were talking about and Instagram about how it causes cancer, and it's like you actually really look into the study, it's not anything that you can make claims about. I think it's really new. The research on the harmful effects of sweeteners, all that stuff's really new. And we don't really have any definitive answers as of now. We can say that it's safe for the human body. People always demonize aspartame, but when you look at where that came from, they were giving rats a tremendous amount of aspartame. I think it was equivalent to like 100 Coca-Colas that someone would have to drink in a day to get that much aspartame. So it's just like these ridiculous things, and people just take it, and then they want to get views or sound bites or whatever they want just to get their name out there. And yeah, it's a bunch of nonsense, but I'm definitely for them. I personally like stevia the best. I like the taste of it. I'll add it in my coffee, my teas. I think it's really useful for contest prep and for people that are trying to lose weight. I've had a lot of people that have a hard time getting away. A lot of my lifestyle people that have a hard time getting away from soda. So change over to diet. Like, oh, I can drink diet soda? Yeah, man.
What about so we were just talking about insulin,
Mm-hmm.
and there still is a secretion of insulin from the pancreas when you consume an artificial sweetener.
No.
Sucralose, aspartame, nothing.
So I haven't seen any data on that. And what people think is your body. So you'll hear the argument. Okay, we take in a sweetener. The body thinks it's sweet, so let's release insulin. No, the body releases insulin when it senses blood sugar that's high. Right.
Right.
So
Just trying to dispose of it.
yeah, exactly. So it's not going to release insulin because it senses something. It's going to release it because something's in the blood that's elevating the glucose.
That makes me feel better.
Unless someone shows me a study that was proven, I'll get on board. I'm not saying that this is, it's my opinion. That's just what I was taught. And
Yeah, but you don't. as far as physique's concerned, right? So like you've put people through a prep drinking diet sodas,
Yeah, man.
and you don't think that that's played an effect in their physique at all. They came
Nope.
in the way you wanted them to come in,
Yep.
and you didn't have to overcompensate with super supplements or anything for
Exactly.
them to be able to drink that Coca-Cola
Right.
or that Diet Coke.
The only thing I would do towards the end is I kind of cut them out towards the end, just because they can, hold water, quote unquote, or cause sometimes, it's more so just like a safe thing to do, so you don't have any GI issues per se. Because when you're that lean, anything can freaking happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, just to be safe, I kind of teeter them off a little bit towards peak week, on the sweeteners, just to be safe. But yeah, pretty much throughout the whole entire prep, I mean, yeah, I'll have them in there. But again, too, like with the research, there's a safe amount that you can take and not have any complications, generally speaking. So
I think that's the hard part, though, is like what's
Yeah.
within reason for people.
For sure.
In our
For
side
sure.
of the industry, your protein sweetened with surculus most likely. Your pre-workout, your aminos. Maybe you're taking a couple other products. You're drinking an energy drink throughout the day. So I feel like they're in extreme situations where you're dieting to a point of where you're trying to be exceptional. I feel like there's a point of marginal return, right? It's like
Yeah.
where do you need to stop?
Yeah.
But for the average person, the bro that just wants to lose weight, it's not really playing an effect
Right.
on
100%.
their physique.
100%.
I think
yeah.
that's fair. I think I
Yeah.
completely agree with you on that.
For sure, man.
What about we talked the other day about like low carb, high carb, and where you kind of stand on that. What's your preference there?
My preference for my diet personally.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like to pick up on a conversation from the other day, I've kind of noticed I don't utilize carbs as well the older I get. So my stance for myself personally is more like a moderate carb approach. For me, moderate means about 300 grams. Maybe a leg day 400. That's kind of the highest I go, and usually once I go past that, I find I don't really utilize them very well for energy. I kind of start storing more fat, and I kind of become more resistant.
Okay.
in a sense.
So if you're at, let's just say, on average you're at 350 grams of carbs a day, right? Throughout the week, 350 protein. Where's your fat with something like that?
I'd say about around 100.
Okay.
My fat will be different throughout the week, because sometimes I'll throw in some nuts there for snacks. But generally speaking, I would say 80 to 100, I guess.
Okay, so it's not high fat by any means.
Nah.
So when you're at that 350 mark and you start pushing to 400, because let's just say you're trying to get to 300 pounds, and you start putting on body fat, right? And you may be insulin resistant at that point, or at least at that level. What do you do at that point to keep gaining without putting on the excess fat?
Yeah, so you can do a couple things. Sometimes I'll have a couple days where I'll go really low carb, try to almost like
But not low
quote-unquote,
calorie. Or low calorie too.
It'll be lower calorie just because I'm taking the carbs out and I'm
Okay.
kind of keeping everything else
The same?
the same, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll kind of give myself a couple low days, or maybe I might carb cycle. Kind of depends on what I'm doing at the time too, or I could increase the cardio. I'll kind of use one of those three methods. Maybe have a couple. So one would be either having a couple low days where I'm having bare minimum, maybe some carb cycling where I have some low days, some high days, some moderate days, or I'll just kind of increase my output. Add some hit cardio in there, or just increase that throughout the week to kind of help.
One thing I noticed when I was doing the carb cycling a couple years ago is every time I had a high carb day, it would make me excited because you get to eat all the oatmeal, and whatever else, potatoes and stuff. And but every time I would have a high carb day, I would have a terrible training session. And I always found that like my medium fat days and my high fat days were my best training sessions. So I actually had to rearrange the way I was, the timing of everything, so I could put my leg day on a medium day where I would actually be performing the best.
Were you consuming? So when you would have those high carb days, were you still full going into your training session, or
Yeah.
or did you make that meal farther back so you had more time to?
So I was
digest?
at that time I was training at like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night.
Okay.
So I had plenty of. I would think I had plenty of meals in me.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I was also super hungry all day. So I don't know if the lack of fat would increase my, what's your hunger hormone, ghrelin?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would increase that or how that worked. But I just found that I was just like burning through it, and I would always end up leaner the next day, right? So you have your high carb day, and I actually got to a point where I would have high carb days on my off training days.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
the next day I wake up and I'd be leaner, I'd look better, even though at the time I wasn't trying to get any leaner. So I just didn't know if there's anything to that, or if I'm just missing the way like muscle glycogen's loaded in the body, or
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got different metabolic flexibility, so it really just depends.
let's say you're taking on like a bro like me, right? I have no interest in competing, just like looking good, lifting heavy, and just enjoying it. When I sign up with you, let's say my training intensity was like pretty good, right? For somebody who's been lifting on and off for 10, 12 years now. Do you think that we could go into a diet and I can, let's say you gave me 3,000 calories, but all of a sudden I started like training a whole lot harder. Do you think that that can dictate my calorie intake, or do you think that it doesn't make that big of a difference based on like training intensity?
What are you asking? Does training intensity
Dictate
matter?
your
How much calories?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I would say yes, it does. Because I mean, obviously we're burning calories when we're training, but generally when I give someone a diet off the go or off the get go, I take where they're at and I build off that point. So say like you came to me and you're at 2,000 calories, right? But you're training and you could use 3,000, right?
Right.
I'm not just gonna put you at 3. I'm gonna slowly build you up to that. Unless you have great genetics, some people can tolerate that big change, but a lot of times they can't. And you'll notice a lot of fat accumulation if you give someone too much food off the get go. So
Right.
I'm a big proponent on just minimum effective dose and building up from where the person's at.
Okay.
More so.
How do you? So we're starting to talk about like implementing changes and stuff like that. I think at this time of year when this is released, most people are going to be interested in getting lean. So we're just talking about bulking, but we'll transition that into dieting down. Like, how do you step somebody into getting lean, right? Because it's not just one linear change,
Yeah.
right? So how do you implement that?
No, great question, man. I love that question. So, and it's funny because I get so many people come to me, Dinos, can you start me a diet to get ready for the summer? It's like, dude, it's not that easy, man.
Yeah.
It's really not that easy. Because sometimes people their bodies aren't even ready to cut. Usually they've been trying it on their own before they come to me. They're already eating nothing, and then they want me to get them in the shape. It's like, dude, you're gonna have to go backwards first before we can take you to that point.
Yeah.
You got to be metabolically ready, because if you're a male, you're already eating 2,000 calories. Where are we going, man? Where are we going? 1,200? No, that's not gonna work.
Well, that's when you start. Especially in women, like you start having more serious issues, reproductive systems, and all that stuff.
For sure. So like it really depends where the person's at with their food, and that's why I said about the other thing where I like to take it where they're currently at. So I'm big on like making sure that you give me your diet recall and it's as accurate as it possibly can be, so I can really see where you're at metabolically. So say we have that person that comes in and they're not eating enough. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to reverse diet them for a little bit. I'm gonna have to explain that to them. Why are we doing that? And generally, sometimes they will get leaner when we do that because I'm giving them more protein, and generally sometimes that helps depending on the genetics of the person. But yeah, usually we will have to take that step, reverse diet, and then I can kind of take them into cutting after that. But very rarely will I see someone that comes to me that's actually ready to cut.
When years ago I watched a video, I think it was definitely with John Meadows. I think Evan Centopani was in it, and we've had both John and Evan out here.
Oh, nice,
Evan's
nice.
been out a couple times.
Okay.
And they're both just really great guys. And one thing John said in the video was like, you always want to have more, I think like more cards in your pocket, right? So anytime I get more serious about my diet or my training, I always try to make it so like I can make one more adjustment, right? So for instance, like I was eating, let's say I'm eating like 5 meals, and I rate, like in my mind, I rate how good those meals are. Like if I want to be 100% on point, so I rate them from 0 to 100%, right? So like let's say we have 5 meals at 80%. Like each card could be making that 90% and then 100%, right? So like maybe my food source is relatively, crappy or poor, or the protein source or something like that. Maybe you're not doing cardio, right? So doing cardio would do that. And then doing cardio frequency could be another change. Training intensity, training frequency. I just feel like all of those are small manipulations that you need to do for like 2 to 4 weeks before you can grandfather your way into another change, right? So like every time you make a change, you have to earn that. And then additionally, like any type of PEDs and that kind of stuff should be saved to like where you're maximizing all of your possible changes, right?
Yep. Saving your ACE card.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got to save the ACE card. Yeah, man. There's definitely people try to throw everything in at one time and then they plateau and they have nowhere to go after that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you want the minimum effective dose for everything.
But that also makes it not sustainable, right? So like if you go balls to the wall right away and you have no other cards to pull, you have nothing else you can change, you just get burnt out. And I feel like that's why we watch these guys, they run these crazy cycles. They have these awesome transformations, but they also look like they went from 30 to 40.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're all burnt out. And then you see them 6 months later and they're, they just look like an older, skinny, fat version of themselves.
Yeah. So, and a lot of those things stem from, where are these guys learning those cycle tactics or reasons of why they're deploying XYZ at this amount. It's a lot of it's just what they hear in the gym, man. It's like as I got more into this, there's like cycle designs that you can learn about and using synergy, and people don't understand the mechanism of action of some of the drugs, and they're just taking random doses that they heard from somebody at the gym or whatever. It's not good, man. I've heard so much crazy stuff at the gym from people. It's insanity.
In their defense, though, I feel like it's always been like that. Like you listen to stories about like all the best bodybuilders in the 90s, and they would just like their friend would come in and be like, "Dude, just take this, I swear." They wouldn't even tell them what it was.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of like a messed up culture. Recently, I would say over like the last year and a half, especially since like. I got married, had a kid, fertility was something to be concerned about. Like I've become kind of like anti-PED. And that's not for everybody, but like most people don't need it. And the way I came across that conclusion was, in 2017, let me backtrack actually. So since 2014, I've been getting my blood work done at a wellness doctor. And he does a full panel. It's like 20 pages, right? And he goes over everything with me, and I'm also friends, so we have like an hour visit to discuss my health. And it's never been super good, right? And with that, I've always had low T. So you're looking at the bottom of the normal range of 300. So I've been prescribed testosterone, cypionate, and Arimidex, or anastrozole, the generic version, since 2014. And what you do on a normal HRT cycle is you would do 9 months on, 3 months on Clomid and HCG to make sure everything's still functioning. And then, you basically do that indefinitely. What I found is I aromatize easily. I hate pinning. And I didn't like the effects of the anastrozole. So in 2017... right before like the keto craze, I tried the keto diet. I got my blood work done in January, and my test levels were like 303 or 309 or something. And then I got them done halfway through, so 3 months in, and then another 3 months later, so 6 months into the ketogenic diet. And my test levels went from 300 to 489. So my weight had only gone down 1 pound. My waist had come in about 2.5 inches, right? So measuring where the belly button is. So what I found is like the food legitimately has an influence on your body's function, right? And if we know that food has an influence on our function, then we shouldn't allow ourselves to compensate with exogenous hormones if we're not doing our part, right? So like we have to kind of earn our keep and earn our right to use that stuff. And I just... personally, I just feel like most people haven't earned the right to use it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And it's like when people ask me all the time, like, "Hey, do you think this is a good idea? Should I, start some testosterone?" It's like, dude, well, like, are you trying to be a professional bodybuilder? Like, what's the end goal here?
Just trying to get juicy as fuck.
Yeah, like, oh, well, I just want to try to look good for the beach this summer. It's like, dude, do you realize that you're going to most likely shut down your natural production? You might be stuck on this for the rest of your life, pinning every single day, or not every single day, but weekly, twice a week, whatever. Depends what you're on. And they just don't understand the process of it, and once you educate them, then they start thinking like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you're right, but it's it's not their fault because like you said, they just don't understand. They don't understand how great the food can be to help them with their goals.
Yeah, I think like there's a certain amount of experimentation that has to go on as well. So like in 2012 when I was competing in at collegiate nationals for powerlifting, that's when I tried my first diet plan. And that was carbohydrate backloading by Ed
Okay.
Kiefer.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So like, we were so broke back then. Like one person bought the book and just sent it to everybody. Right. So I got the book, the ebook, and just followed the diet along. And I noticed that my body weight couldn't go up anymore. I was trying to bump to the 220 weight class. I'm kind of a small frame, so I couldn't go up anymore. But I was getting leaner. That's cool, but that wasn't helping me get any stronger. So I had to ditch that diet, but I did follow that for maybe 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
And then I followed a low-fat diet that my buddy who does like physique prep stuff. So he's like he would set your fat, he would set your protein at 1.2 times the lean body mass of your body, right?
Gotcha.
And then your fat would be at 20% of total calories, and your carbs would be the rest. So I would do that on and off, and I found that worked really well when I was actively taking the HRT, because I guess my test levels were higher. Maybe I could synthesize carbohydrates better. I don't really know. I've done the ketogenic diet. I've done the carb cycling. But every time I do a template diet or a fad diet, I learn something about my body, right? So like now I'm at the point where I can just kind of take, pick and choose these little pieces of things that I've learned over time and just kind of put it together for something that's not only like effective for me, because I'm sure people are watching this like, well, you could, add a little size, but it's sustainable. Right. So like, I feel like that's the biggest part is, Stand Efforting always says compliance is a science. But like the sustainability of it is important. But I don't know if you've had a similar experience of like the trial and error of different diets. Have you done that too?
Not to your extent.
Okay.
I've experimented with, lower carb, lower fat, higher carb. But not to your extent. But no, you're 100% spot on. It all depends what the person can adhere to on a daily basis. Intermittent fasting, that might only be suitable for somebody that has a desk job. They're not very active and they don't really like to work out, or they don't care about muscle mass. It might be great for a person like that. But for somebody that's, in the gym trying to get gains, things like that, they might find that doesn't work really well for them. So like you said, it's just finding out a system that works well for you. And that's going to be the key.
Yeah, actually, so what was interesting about carb backloading is, on the days that you weren't training, you were ketogenic. On the days you were training, you were keto until you would train, and then afterwards you would be low fat, high carb, and you would eat a bunch of crap, right? Like cereal, donuts, it's all in the book. Like that's what he wanted. But then like the third phase of it is that you would actually implement intermittent fasting. It doesn't sound like you're a big fan for bodybuilding purposes of intermittent fasting. I'm not either. I think it's also an issue with what you break that fast with. I had a customer that said intermittent fasting was working great for him because he went from 3 meals to 2 meals, so his calorie was changing. But his meal, which would essentially be number 1, but would have been number 2 if he didn't fast, was mod pizza. Like you don't break your fast with mod pizza. There's no point in that. But the third phase of it was the intermittent fasting implementation, and the only thing that really gets me out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning is knowing that I'm going to eat this huge meal for breakfast, and that's honestly it's my favorite part of the day. It's solitude, it's quiet in the house. I get to cook my meal, and I like that part. I don't think there's really any. I know people go into autophagy and all that stuff. I just don't think that there's huge benefits to fasting.
Yeah, and I don't think we're there yet with the research either to know definitively of what it actually does. There's a lot of the longevity stuff that they talk about with fasting, but all that's like animal studies at this point in time. So it's all speculative. So, but yeah, there's definitely uses for every single diet out there, but it all comes down to the goal, adherence, and what the person likes to do.
Yeah, I will say, like, for those of you guys listening or watching right now, I've been experimenting with a really low-carb diet for the last, I guess, like 8 to 10 weeks. The only carbohydrates I really consume are intra-workout carbohydrate powders. Occasionally I'll have some potatoes, post-workout. But for me, the benefit of that I'm not really hungry, right? So, like, eating that much fat in my diet, I can catch up on meals later. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can eat my big breakfast. I can eat my shake with my almonds, later in the day. I don't really need to eat again until like maybe 5 o'clock. And I'll make sure I still eat all my meals, even if they're back to back or if I mix them all together. That way I keep my calories and, my protein content the same. But I think just being like busy and not being hungry is a major benefit for me. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if you've had similar experiences.
No, it does. But like, what would you say your goals are right now? Is it just to maintain, your current physique? Are you trying to get leaner? Are you trying to focus on being more mentally alert? Like, what's the focus, or is there not one, and you're just
I think it's like 80% of all of the above, if that makes sense, right?
Okay.
Like, I want to look a little bit better. We're going on vacation in less than a month. So that like that, that's a benefit of it, but I'm still performing really well in the gym. Yeah. So although my calories, so another thing you talked about was eating consistently before you start dieting. And I did that even though I was out of the gym for all of November. I ate the same meals every day since probably July of last year, all the way through February. Wow. Like, my meals really didn't change. And I always have like substitutes, right? So if I need 20, let's just say 30 grams of protein, a can of tuna is like 27, a certain amount of ground turkey's this much. Right. I always have my like options if I'm on the go or something, so I can stay on track. So there is a little bit of variety in it. But for the most part, I ate very consistently. And my wife thinks I'm a robot. Because like food just doesn't really entertain me. And, so I did that, and then I transitioned into this low-carb thing relatively quick. I was doing just carbohydrates post-workout, and I didn't see much change in the physique, so I decided to cut them out. And, my calorie levels are still about the same. So I entered it in at, like, 3,200. I'm at probably, like, last time I calculated, it was like 2960. Okay. So I mean, they're still really close. And the only other change that I had since changing that diet was I do 3 to 4 times a week. We do a 1.5 mile walk around the neighborhood. Okay. Right. So like my NEAT or my daily expenditure has gone up a little bit.
Gotcha.
But outside of that, and I mean, I'm down like two belt loops or belt holes. So like something is changing there. And I don't know if it was the point of, insulin resistance or if it was a point of just, poor food choices or whatever. But for me, like, there's something to, even if it's just the compliance of the low-carb dieting, where I just feel good. And I also think that it has something to do with the increased amount of cholesterol that I'm consuming has to have something to do with the testosterone levels, because it boosted it once. And I'm going to use that one-time data, which I know isn't good science, to say that it's probably doing it again.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're definitely correct on that, though. That's actually how testosterone is made from fat. From right. Cholesterol, we get cholesterol from fat, so it's definitely part of the process. 100%. Did you get your free test checked too, along with your total test?
Yeah, I don't recall the numbers, and I know that's more important than the total test.
Yeah.
But I just remember, the doctor saying like, how much are you taking on the milligram dose? Because he wanted to know so he could, make notes. And I told him I hadn't taken it in, 6-9 months. And he goes, oh, this is great. And the other thing, when he does your blood, it's fasted. Okay. And my fasted glucose or fasted insulin levels, were really good too. Okay. And they weren't as good before. What was also interesting with that blood work, and this is years ago in 2017, was that my cholesterol went from red to orange to green. So I was eating, back then I started at 240 grams of fat a day, which is a lot. And the fact that my cholesterol got better, I just thought it was really strange. And maybe I don't know if it's genetic or what, but maybe there is some correlation to carbohydrates and cholesterol versus eating cholesterol and cholesterol.
Yeah, no, there 100% is. High carbohydrate diet tend to increase triglycerides for a lot of people, but there is a big study that came out, I forget how long ago it was, and it kind of just confirmed that cholesterol, generally speaking, is from genetics. It just depends on the person's liver, how much it produces. You'll have the occasional hypersensitive person to the food in response to their blood levels with the cholesterol, but generally speaking, it's more so the genetic component. But no, 100%. If you have a high carb diet, that can translate over to higher cholesterol sometimes for people. I've definitely seen that a lot.
Yeah. I think that was definitely my case. I also felt like, I used to have a lot of skin issues.
Okay.
When I went high fat, all my skin issues went away.
Really?
Yeah, and I thought that was strange too. So maybe it's a genetic thing where my body just runs off of fat better. I know my wife is
Very
Maltese,
possible.
and like sometimes I'll come home and she'll be eating a brick of cheese because that's what they do. So she functions really well off of fat. So maybe it's genetic.
So let me ask this too. Did you change your fat sources at all of where you were getting the fat from when you went to the higher fat diet, or has it kind of just stayed the same?
No, it definitely changed because I actually, when I did that, the previous 6 months, I was doing that 20% fat. So in order for me to go from like 55 or 60 grams of fat to 240, like my sources had to change so I could consume that much. A lot of it was coming from olive oil, eggs, and
Nice.
I would do bacon. I would do a lot of red meat, and I was doing a lot of cheeses in the beginning, but I don't think cheese provides any value to anybody. Like I feel like it's a waste of calorie other than it tastes good. So when I cut the cheese out is really when I started to see the changes in my physique, and I think that had something to do with the change in cholesterol too.
Okay.
But I didn't eat the cheese prior, so that was an add-on to reach my fat goals.
Gotcha. No, I mean your fat sources sound pretty good. Olive oil, eggs, things like that. They're all good, and that's another misconception too with eggs and cholesterol. People think if you eat a lot of eggs, you're gonna have high cholesterol. It's not true.
Yeah, and I think
true.
that
Fake
was
news.
Yeah, I think that was bad with the with the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
Is they really got the kind of the shaft on that.
Yeah.
And they were also told that margarine was better than butter, right? And I think the science is really just starting to come out on the different like lengths or chains of fats, like within saturated fat, right? You have like 3 different sizes of fats. So I feel like we're getting there. We're making progress, but there's so many like different camps of diet is becoming like religion kind of. So like you have the vegan community, which is using a lot of oils. Do you think it matters as far as like the vegetable oils and that kind of stuff that's in food?
That's a great question. I'm still up in the air with that one in my thought process. I'm not sure which way I'm going with that. I will say, olive oil, you definitely can't go wrong with that. But is in terms of like, what are some of them like, canola oil, what's the other one? Safflower.
Yeah.
I think that's another
So
one.
canola oil is from corn, right?
Yeah, somewhat to my recollection. Yeah.
So that's like weird to me because corn doesn't have a lot of fat.
I know.
So like, where are you getting this from?
I know that's definitely something that I'm not too well versed on, to be honest with you. Definitely something I'm looking into because I've heard both sides of the arguments, but there's a lot of research that shows that the oils really aren't as bad as what people say they are, and then you have the other camps that say that they are. But I would say there's more evidence to say that they're not as bad as what people make them out to be. I've kind of seen that more, so that's kind of where I lean more towards, but I don't really think there's like a definitive answer on it yet.
Yeah, I think my honest opinion is it comes down to like regulation and consumption,
Exactly.
right? So like if you're eating, a burger that's fried in the oil, it may be charred. So I saw that the amount of something, how it's cooked, can play an effect on how it oxidizes within the body, right? So like that's now an issue. Plus the oils, plus all the carbohydrates and the fat, and like when you put all of those things combined and then you do it ritually, that's where you really start to run into issues. I feel like, if you wanted to have a little bit of canola oil, a couple times a week, it's not going to kill you, right? And you probably wouldn't even notice the health issues with it or benefits or whatever because you're not consuming it constantly. Like, I just don't feel like canola oil is meant to be consumed regularly. right?
Agreed. And I mean that kind of goes with everything. Like the poisons in the dose
Yeah,
with literally everything. You know,
that's fair.
with sweeteners, oils,
PEDs.
PEDs, everything. You
Yeah.
know, there's a safe amount for almost any food out there. But yeah, you are right. If the way that certain meats are cooked, if they're burned, it oxidizes different in the body.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people should be focused on those little things. I think they really need to take care of the bigger fish first, like the low hanging fruit,
Yeah.
and not so much the little minor
Well,
details.
it's got to be steps, right? Like we
Yeah,
talked about. You gotta
exactly.
do one thing at a time.
Exactly.
What about like sleep quality? Do you think that has any effect on like calorie intake?
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's some research on this too. Some good research with sleep and the amount of calories that you'll burn. So, for example, if you don't get a good night's sleep, you're shown to burn more muscle throughout the day and not metabolize carbohydrates as well.
Okay, so the gray area with that is what's not enough.
What do you mean? Like sleep.
Like
sleep.
Arnold would always say like he would sleep 4 to 5 hours a night, and what was his famous line? Like sleep faster.
Then again, he's on PEDs too, so you have that cushion to kind of lean on, which kind of changes the physiology of your body. So I would definitely make that argument, but nah, man, for the average person that needs their hormones in proper range, they're gonna need their sleep, man. I mean, I would say the research 7 to 9, even for some athletes, I've even seen like up to 10. There's some sports dietitians that are recommending that to some of their athletes, which isn't really doable for a lot of people, but
Yeah, but if you're a professional athlete,
exactly.
you can sleep.
But for like, I was more so meaning like college and stuff. But yeah, I would say definitely no less than 7. But yeah, I forget what the numbers were with the studies, but I think it was less than 6 or 7 that they saw those differences.
So what could like a 25-year-old, let's say they're sleeping 5 hours a night, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they want to come to you and start a prep.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between them sleeping 5 and 8?
A lot, man. They're not gonna get into shape as well. Their body's gonna be more stressed. Prep is it is so stressful on your body, and if you want it to respond the way you want it to, you really need to mitigate stress as best as you can. Meaning your lifestyle, your sleep, all those things are gonna manage your cortisol. So that's something that really needs to be like the top priority is sleep.
Can you explain what cortisol is?
Yeah, so cortisol, it's a stress hormone. It gets released in times of stress. It'll naturally peak in the morning for people, but say if you're like a high stress person, or quote unquote a bug out, always bugging out about stuff, or can't stay calm, you probably have high cortisol all the time, and you're constantly in this like fight or flight state or sympathetic. You only want to be in the sympathetic state when you're training. You don't want to be sympathetic all day long. You want to be in a parasympathetic, nice and relaxed, calm. You'll be utilizing your nutrients better partitioning. When you're constantly stressed, your body's just not going to be operating the way you want it to. And all the aspects of getting lean, putting muscle, holding muscle, it all ties together with the sleep.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the biggest benefits of PEDs is actually its ability to combat cortisol, right? Like it's not just for the anabolic effect, but yeah.
Yep.
So. All right. I got one more thing for you. Salt.
Yeah.
Are you pro salt? Or do you think it should be limited?
Pro salt.
Yeah.
Pro salt. Yeah.
Me too.
100%. The only way I wouldn't be pro salt is if you have someone that's you're older and you're really salt sensitive.
Like somebody with hypertension.
Exactly. Yeah. But otherwise, it's very needed. I actually added into pretty much all my protocols. I'll have people adding it to their pre-workout, their intra-workout. I had to have them adding it to the meals, because generally if you're eating nutrient-dense foods, you're not really going to be getting a lot of sodium, and you really need that. I'd say for general recommendations, maybe 4 to 6 grams for an athletic person, someone in the gym.
I've never measured salt. I just go by eyes,
Eyes.
That looks good.
Yeah. I think a quarter teaspoon is about 500 milligrams.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I first heard about it with like Stan Efferding was recommending like salt tabs to powerlifters before they would train. So I started adding more salt to my foods, and I noticed I started feeling better, and I actually think I recover better. So I use iodized sea salt 2 to 3 times a day. I think iodine is like a a lost art.
Yeah.
You know, everybody wants this like organic salt and all this stuff. Well, there's a reason why, you know, they put iodine in the
Yeah,
salt.
100%.
So I use iodized salt. You know, I think it helps with thyroid function. And you know, and then I do regular sea salt throughout the day because I know iodine poisoning is a real thing. So you don't want to overdo that. But yeah, I think it makes me feel a ton better, especially like pre and post workout. You know,
Yeah.
it can help with the pump, like,
Dude.
and it's so cheap. Why wouldn't you add it?
100%.
Yeah.
It's actually involved in like a lot more things than people actually realize, like muscular contraction, you know, delivering nutrients, the muscle cells, or
Yeah.
to the cells of the body, keeping you hydrated. You know, that's all. When someone says like they're dehydrated, salt is part of it. You know, you're low in salt as well as water. So to get rehydrated, you want to implement the salt, potassium, all that needs to be in place to be, you know, quote unquote hydrated.
Yeah.
So it's not just water. When people think of hydration, you know, you got all the electrolytes, magnesium too, calcium. All those play a big role in delivering of nutrients and muscle contractions.
It's funny you say it, and I don't know if I've said this on a previous podcast, but we you know, we had an athlete years ago who was a bodybuilder, and she actually gave herself rhabdo. Are you familiar with rhabdo? Because she drank too much water, and what happened was that it actually stripped out the electrolytes from her system, and the balance was off, right? And she ended up in the hospital with you know, her kidneys were eating themselves or eating the muscle,
Wow.
and yeah, just from too much water. So
Wow.
a little bit of salt would have
Yeah,
cured that.
100%.
So it's
100%.
crazy how important it really is. But Dalton, I appreciate you coming here. We're going to get some training in after this. You know, I'm going to show them how to work out. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my Instagram name is dnice11 with 2 E's. You can find me on Instagram. That's where I post most of my stuff.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.